everyone. Welcome to the No Man's Land. I'm Angela Ramirez. Today is October 27th. I uploaded this video yesterday. Unfortunately, it cut off halfway through, so I'm going to re-record it, re-upload it for you. Thank you to the people on YouTube who let me know that there was something wrong with the end of the video. Today we're going to be talking about the Boogaloo Bois and how they have been portrayed as a right-wing extremist group. They are an extremist group. However, the media has sort of ran with the narrative that this is an exclusively right-wing group, and that's not exactly true. I think that it's important when covering extremist topics, extremist groups, that we take the time to really understand what is going on with their ideology, what their goals are, and who they are aligning themselves with. So, that said, that's what we're going to talk about today. For those of you who prefer to read this information, you can find it at my website, thenomanzone.com. The publication is called The No Man's Land. I am the journalist here. It's kind of my independent project. I am not funded by any major news organization. I am completely independent, which brings me to the fact that I rely on you guys. If you enjoy this content, please consider donating or sharing this video. You can also find me on Twitter at @COAngela Ramirez. You can also find our Facebook page at Facebook No Man's Land EP. So, with that said, let's get into it. We're going to talk about the Boogaloo movement and how they have aligned themselves with anarcho-communist ideologies. This is very different from right wing, and I think it's crucial to point this out. So, I'm just going to kind of read through this article that I've written. It is an investigative piece, so it's a little bit long, and I do have a number of sources that I've cited at the bottom of the article, as usual. If you choose to review the sources, you can always find all of my sources at the bottom of the article. They're numerically listed. So let's get into it here. The Boogaloo movement aligns with anarcho-communist ideology. Despite much speculation that the Boogaloo Bois are a right-wing group, the terms left and right are limited in today's complex political landscape. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is the author of the Gulag Archipelago, that book was smuggled out of Russia. It was a book about how the Soviet justice system really failed and was responsible for the jailing and death of millions and millions of people. Actually, it's speculated that more people were imprisoned and killed as a result of imprisonment during the Soviet Russian regime. And when I say Soviet Russian, I really mean the Bolshevik Revolution and the Lenin and Stalin era of Russia. Anyway, it is definitely known that more people were jailed during that revolutionary period and post-revolutionary period than those who were imprisoned in the Holocaust. Now, that's not to minimize what happened during the Holocaust. I just think it's really important to point out that these horrors are not exclusive to Nazism. That it has actually been the case with many communist regimes for people to experience really, really terrible and shocking human rights violations. So that said, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the author of the Gulag Archipelago, he commented in his book about how limited the terms left and right were during Russia's 20th century political landscape. And now in the United States today, we are seeing that same limitation on the right and left political spectrum. It's really hard to fit everybody into a left or a right winger. So, right, for those of you guys who don't know, right has typically been used to represent everything from moderate social conservatives, so what you would consider, I guess, a Republican, to extremist Nazism, which is the idea that there's a political need to enact an ethno-state. Obviously, that is extremism, and that is inhumane and wrong. Now, the term left has been typically used to represent social democrats, what we would consider Democrats, or maybe like socialists, to Marxist extremists like communists. And I think it's important to point out, like I just did about, the Bolshevik Revolution, that Nazism is bad and horrible and leads to human rights violations. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum is communism, which also is bad and has been proven on many occasions to create this pretty much almost the same or worse human rights violations as what we saw during World War II Nazi Germany. So, while conservatism and liberalism, right and left, can easily be explained away on a political spectrum, groups like the Boogaloo Boys, they don't fit so neatly into those simplistic political distinctions. Many of these Boogaloo Boys typically consider themselves libertarians or anarchists. And here on the screen, if you guys are able to watch this, you'll see a few Twitter posts that I have embedded into the article. If you're just listening, I'll go ahead and explain them for you. The post is from a person named Boogaloo, which is like it's a phrase that the Boogaloo Boys will use. It's kind of, I believe it has some connotation towards Islamic extremists. And it says, this is why I love Joseph Stalin. Killed like what, 200 to 250 million commies. Imagine if it was real communism. There probably wouldn't be any commies left. A boy can dream, I suppose. And the meme, it's a meme that is attached to. And the top of it says what kids think communism is, and it's a bunch of people holding hands. And then at the bottom it says what communism really is. And basically it is a line of people holding guns, and they are pointing those guns at a single individual. I don't think I'm actually going to show that picture because it is kind of brutal. But that's what it shows at the bottom, is that there's a number of people pointing their weapons in a line at a single individual. And unfortunately, that really is an accurate representation of what happened during communist regimes, specifically in Russia. They just picked off people. It was really, really horrifying. I highly recommend the book, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Anyway, so moving to the next post. This one was posted by the Boogletarian. It says, when a civil war is about to start and you have plenty of guns, armor, and kit, but you don't like either of the teams, and there's a guy standing with his hands on his hips. And really what that suggests is that, the Boogaloo Boys, they are not communists. They are really not radical right. They really are somewhere in the fray, but we don't really have a good way to identify them on, the typical conservative Democrat political spectrum. And I think it's really important to point this out because right now there has been a number of articles and talk coming out from mainstream media companies that really identify the Boogaloos as a right-wing extremist organization. And we're going to get into why they paint them that way, but we're also going to get into why that is not the case. It's really dangerous, in my opinion, to improperly label extremist groups. I think that as journalists, it's our job to do the best we can to explain what's really happening in nuance, because the world doesn't happen in, black and white vacuums. Sometimes there are things that are, very cut and clear. There's certain things that are very cut and clear. But when we're talking about extremist groups, it's very hard to just put them into a box and say that's it, right? So here we're going to get into why a lot of these news organizations call them right-wing. Okay, so misconceptions about the Boogaloo movement. It is true that Boogaloo groups are often seen at 2A rallies supporting the traditionally right-wing ability to carry firearms without infringement. It has been argued that the Boogaloo movement houses white supremacists and racist radicals in search of creating an ethno-state. But posts from known Boogaloo members actually contradict the idea of the movement being a hub for racist ideology. Instead, many Boogaloo members are equally anti-state and anti-racist. There are Boogaloo members from many different ethnic backgrounds. In fact, if we just scroll up to this first picture here, I'm not sure if you guys can make this out, but there are a number of Boogaloo members here in this picture. This is a known Boogaloo group. One of these individuals has recently been arrested for attempting to aid terror organizations. But as you can see here, there are people from many different backgrounds. It's not just white individuals. It's not just Caucasian individuals. We actually have people from many different minorities here. We have what looks like, a few Black Americans. We have perhaps maybe a Hispanic American. And, it's important to point this out that this is not a group that is completely, I guess, created on ethnic terms, right? Like, this is an ideological movement, okay? And we're going to get into what that ideology is here. So the arrests, if we go back to where we were in the article, it says the arrests of most Boogaloo members this year have been directly connected to what would be considered leftist action during the George Floyd anti-police riots. This is largely due to the fact that the Boogaloo movement aligns with anti-police groups based on the ultimate goal of eliminating what they perceive to be an overreaching government. And so that really is the key there, is that the Boogaloo movement is completely dependent and is fueled by the hope that they can eliminate the government, that they believe that the government is overreaching, that we have too big of a government, and thus their goal is to create a civil war. This is actually what their goal is. They want to prepare and essentially incite a civil war that will allow I guess it's kind of like separatism movement, the separation of states in their current form into smaller, like more bite-sized, I guess, legislations is essentially what the goal is. So, in many cases throughout 2020, the Boogaloo movement's actions have shown that they're not necessarily tied to a political ideology. This is what we've been saying. We can't really just put them into right and left boxes. Instead, they are very focused on the overall goal. And for the Boogaloos, the goal is inciting a second civil war and waging attacks on the U.S. government. And I actually have a source there that I have cited about really the aim of the Boogaloos to incite a second civil war. You guys can go into the No Man's Zone and you can find that source there. I'm not going to get into it here, but let's move forward. The Boogaloos align with whoever fits their needs at the time. Unlike neo-Nazi and right-wing groups with a specific political ideology, the Boogaloo movement typically aligns itself with whatever political group matches their ultimate goal of a second civil war. As we've seen this year, the Boogaloo movement has appeared at both right-wing and left-wing protests, but the bulk of their violent actions have been in relation to left-wing direct action. This is largely because the majority of anti-government action is being perpetuated by the Marxist-led Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the anarcho-communist Antifa cells throughout the country. So this is like what we were saying. The Boogaloo movement is not really a solidified political ideology. They are opportunists who are aligning themselves with whoever fits, with whatever political ideology fits their ultimate goal of inciting and promoting a second civil war. So now let's get into the Boogaloo Bois and how they're aligning with leftist Marxist movements. I'm going to provide evidence, including arrest records. That way, it's not just speculation, because I don't believe as a journalist it's my job to speculate. I believe it's my job to look at facts and present them to you in a way that allows the underlying occurrences and stories to come out, right? I don't want to say, hey, look, this is what I think is happening. I want to say, look, hey, here's A, B, C thing that happened. This is what it means. Okay, so here we go. Contrary to the narrative portrayed by most major news stations today, the Boogaloo movement has begun to unofficially align itself with radicalized BLM supporters. While many look at the BLM movement as a second civil rights movement, the reality is much different. Unlike the civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, which clearly pointed out injustices and provided solutions to those injustices, the goal of the Black Lives Matter movement is to ultimately change the entire social fabric of the United States all the way down to the nuclear family. Furthermore, Black Lives Matter groups themselves are crafted by self-proclaimed trained Marxists. So I'm just going to play a short clip here, because for those of you who haven't watched my channel, maybe you're not familiar with my work, one of the things that I focus on is Marxist influence in the U.S. I also focus on extremist groups and corporate influence in politics, but one of the things that I really focus on is Marxist influence in the U.S. And the Black Lives Matter movement is actually founded by self-proclaimed trained Marxists who I mean, obviously, they bring that radical left Karl Marx ideology into their day-to-day operations and their overall goal with the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm just going to play a very short clip of the one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Khan-Kollers. I'm going to play a short clip of her explaining her underlying ideology. Here we go.
The criticism is helpful. I also think that it might. I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Okay, so that's just a really short clip. You can watch that full segment on my site. But as you heard, we are trained organizers, we are trained Marxists. They do have an ideological frame. This was not just about police brutality. This is about bringing Marxist-fueled rhetoric into the United States and using it as a platform to incite the type of social change that they feel is necessary. Okay, so the Boogaloo Bois, because their ultimate goal is preparing for a civil war, right now they are not well aligned with conservatives and Republicans. Now, maybe there are some right-wing extremist groups that they would happily align with and fit well with. However, the bulk of the anti-police, anti-government rhetoric today is not coming from the conservative right. It's not really even coming from people that you would consider extremists. I personally don't consider the Proud Boys extremists, but some people would argue that they are. And you know, it's not, this anti-police, anti-government rhetoric isn't coming from the Proud Boys, even though a lot of people consider them to be extremists, which I don't believe is the case, but that's a video for another day. Anyway, so the anarcho-communist movement is largely fueled, as most of us know, by BLM and Antifa radicals, right? So as a result, the Boogaloos are using the chaos and anti-police sentiment running rampant on the left as an opportunity to arrange their violent actions in unison with a larger movement. So this anti-police, anti-government rhetoric that's coming from Black Lives Matter extremists and Antifa cells, what this is doing is giving the Boogaloo movement it's giving them fodder. It's giving them a cover to operate. And so as a result, they're aligning themselves with these groups. They're using this as an opportunity. As I said before, these guys are opportunists. So we're going to get into examples now of how they have aligned themselves with these radical left movements, right? So example number one is a Texas Boogaloo boy was busted for violence during Minneapolis's George Floyd riots. And this isn't just violence. He actually shot at a police station with an AK-style rifle. So let's get into the story here. After an investigation conducted by the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, a Texas resident was arrested for allegedly conducting an armed attack on a Minneapolis police station during the George Floyd riots earlier this year. Ivan Harrison Hunter, age 26, has been charged with one count of interstate travel to incite a riot. During the riot, he allegedly shot at the Minneapolis 3rd Police Precinct with an AK-style rifle. After shooting, it was believed via video evidence that Hunter fired 13 total rounds at the precinct, and at the time it was believed that looters were still inside the building. Needless to say, the National George Floyd direct actions were largely a result of left-leaning individuals influenced by the rhetoric and social goals of the Marxist-led Black Lives Matter global network. Example 2, the Oakland shooter who attacked a police station connected with the Boogaloo Bois. So a man connected with the Boogaloo Bois has been charged with one count of murder and one count of attempted murder of a police officer or government official. According to an affidavit of arrest, Stephen Carrillo, allegedly carried out a premeditated attack on federal courthouse in Oakland, California, while his comrade Robert Alvin Justice Jr. drove. Stephen Carrillo opened fire on 2 guards at the Oakland Federal Courthouse. One guard died from his wounds, the other was severely wounded. The attack occurred on May 29, 2020. This attack occurred during the height of the Oakland riots, which were fueled once again by the George Floyd anti-police sentiment and the radicalized rhetoric promoted by Black Lives Matter influencers. All right, example 3. Boogaloo Bois provided security to rioters in Minneapolis and were charged for providing material support to Hamas. For those of you who don't know who Hamas is an internationally designated terror organization. They are a Islamic extremist group, and a couple of Boogaloo Bois have now been charged for attempting to provide material support in the manner of firearms and firearm accessories to an individual that they believed was a Hamas agent. It actually turned out that this person was an undercover FBI agent and they were busted. But what I'm trying to point out here is the fact that those 2 individuals were actually seen in Minneapolis and caught on video saying that they were there with the protesters. They were there to provide security for the protesters and to keep them safe, they said, from police. So now we have 2 Boogaloo Bois who not only attempted to provide material support to an international terror organization, but they have actually been caught on camera saying that they are in support of the Black Lives Matter rioters, they are in support of the BLM movement, and were actually on scene during riots to essentially provide security. So let's read a little bit about this. In a short interview with the leftist riot-focused news station Unicorn Riot, for those of you guys who don't know who Unicorn Riot is, they are a pretty much leftist news station. I don't know if they're new, but I've never really seen their work before this year. They just go around from riot to riot, painting the rioters in a favorable frame. So these 2 Boogaloo Bois, they admitted that they were in Minneapolis to provide security and support to Minneapolis BLM protesters. Here's a short video.
What's bringing you all down?
Just keeping an eye on the cops.
Keep an eye on the cops?
Oh, yeah.
Let us pull over real quick.
Yeah, we're happy to talk to you, man.
Good call. What up? Yep, hold on.
How's it going, boss?
What's up?
Hey,
So yeah, what's bringing you all down?
keep an eye on the cops. We're out here with the protesters.
We want to keep the protesters safe. Look at what the fuck just happened.
Yep.
So yeah, you talking about yesterday?
No,
Look
I'm
at-
talking about like
just
an
now?
hour ago.
So this is coming off, you know what happened yesterday in Kenosha, right?
Right.
So do you understand that like people will have weird interpretations of what you all are doing?
I understand.
We know, and we know the risks that come with it. But
So I don't know if you've looked into that, dude. We figured out who he was about 30 minutes after it happened. We had intel teams on it. Guy had a page full of thin blue line shit. Fucking police cadet. Mom was a cop. That's what he came there to do. It's not what we're about. We're with the Mujahideen. Anybody with a boog patch, fucking against the police. That's what it comes down to. We have nothing to do with that guy.
anybody that's a true Boogaloo person
That's
is against
correct.
the police.
Obviously, someone could
Anybody
pretend
can
to be
wear a
with us.
patch. I could say I'm a cop. I'm not a cop. Too fat to be one. But a true Boog person is for everybody.
Yep.
Liberty and justice for all, not a select few.
We were out here for the first round of protests, and you can find pictures and media from me then, so you can verify who I am, verify that I haven't been out here hurt protesters. I've been out here on y'all's side. Now that it's starting again, we're out here to do the same thing. We want to back y'all up, and if the police start shooting you, we're going to shoot back.
What's your name?
You can find that on there.
Yeah, how do people find it? If people are watching this right now and they're like, well, I don't know if I...
Okay, I'm going to cut it there. So, as you heard, these two are with the Boogaloo Bois, and they said it very plain and clear that they are with the protesters. They're there to provide safety against the police. And they blatantly said that if the police shoot at the protesters, which hasn't happened, police have not been using live bullets, that they will be shooting back. That goes exactly to what I have been pointing out in this article, which is the fact that the Mujahideen, the Boogaloo Bois, they have the ultimate goal of a civil war, and they are against the police. They are pushing for a libertarian anarchist state. And, you know, when a lot of people say that these guys are far right, this is not a far right movement, as you can see. Far right movements are not typically anarchist. They are not typically anti-police. And I think that has gone to, I think that it's very clear that they are not anti-police, with the fact that so many of what you consider right-wing groups have actually showed up to protect their city. They have showed up to kind of combat the rioting that has gone on and showed up in support of police. So for these guys to say, we're anti-police, we're out here with the rioters, we're here to provide security, essentially, that is a huge testament to the fact that the Boogaloo Bois are not aligning themselves with right-wing groups. They're actually aligning themselves with left-wing, BLM, Antifa groups. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Here we go. In the past, the Boogaloo Bois were typically only considered a far-right militia group that supported radical right-wing groups. Now, evidence shows that they are, at minimum, a combination of extremist anarchists and libertarians coming together to utilize the chaos perpetrated by leftist-fueled riots to further their goal. The fact that the Boogaloo Bois have actually been seen on camera saying they were present at a riot to support the Black Lives Matter groups suggests that they are in support of these leftist anti-police groups. These are opportunists. They're not easily put into a political box. Overall, it is unrealistic to suggest that the Boogaloo movement is exclusively right or left. Instead, they are opportunistic groups with the intention of pairing with any political party that shares their ultimate goal of destabilizing the government. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Please share the video. Also, you can find me on thenomanzone.com. If you guys really did enjoy the video, please consider making a small donation to keep me a journalist. You can also share this video. That helps a lot. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day, everybody, and we will see you soon for the next segment. Take care, everyone.